Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Psychology of Lockdown. It's been a little while since episode 19. This is the 20th episode. Today, we are covering the no talk rule. I am happy to introduce my new guest, Genevieve Schuff. I believe I got that right.
Yeah.
And I just want to let everybody know that George and I have parted ways. He got extremely busy with Canadian Rights Watch. And so I've invited Genevieve onto the show to help complete the series. We've got 3 or 4 more rules of dysfunction to cover, so we can wrap up the entire Psychology of Lockdown series based on John Bradshaw's family systems therapy. And so I'm just happy to be able to have Genevieve on to be able to finish up this work. It's been well, I just think it's so interesting to be able to make these connections between psychology and then what's going on, our family psychology and what's going on in terms of these lockdowns and the mandates and people's reactions. I think it's so pertinent, as we've discussed before on the show, when we're trying to have conversations with others, especially if we disagree with the dominant narrative. How they just kind of shut down and why are they shutting down. So today, the no listen rule, of course, we're going to dive into what is happening inside people's minds when they can't listen to you, when you're just trying to have a conversation and explain your perspective to those who disagree with you. So thanks for coming on the show, Genevieve. And
Thank you.
You want to just give people a little bit about your history and background and your education in psychology?
Yeah, I have a master's of science degree in psychology that I got in England. And at the time, I was interested in like art therapy and play therapy and music therapy, and didn't end up becoming a psychologist because you don't actually spend time with anybody. When you do that, it's all the paperwork. So I did case management and started working with traumatized folks, really children and adults. And then that kind of led into advocacy and mediation and fair hearing, which is like arbitration, and then yoga. So I'm a forest yoga teacher, which has to do a lot with trauma and relationships. And I have a lot of different jobs. I tutor. I used to be a substitute teacher and do body work, which again is like reading tension in a different way rather than talking to somebody. So it feels like I became a yoga therapist. But when people ask me, I say I'm a social worker or a teacher. And I work with traumatized kids now, like foster children. And I feel like a teacher, social worker in all of my jobs. I kind of throw that in. But
and what university did you get your degree from?
The University of Central Lancashire.
Nice.
In Preston, which if you are familiar with England and I say that, people go, what? From Preston? You came all the way over here and you went to Preston? Because it's in the north. And it's like a mining town that pretty much is nothing in the summer, but I had a great experience. It was, best times because I had friends from all over, so big international parties, when I was international.
Yeah.
And it was more of that college experience when I actually got my undergrad was Cal State San Marcos in San Diego. And then I did art and lots of variety in my work. It makes me feel free.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective about family systems and how they work, apply especially to this COVID situation. So I also will you please explain to the audience, because I know you do a lot of local activism here where we live in Mendocino County in Northern California. So will you just explain for people some of the background, especially since COVID has started, in terms of your political activism?
Yeah, we have a group now that really was several of us doing our own thing that now is linked up, and we're MendocinoPatriots.org. And you can sign up there for different fractions, really. The action fraction, which we just did a maskless shopping and, rallies in front of the school vaccination clinics for 5 to 11-year-olds. We have a Facebook group, Mendo Health Freedom Fighters, that is on the brink of being disabled. It was disabled for a while yesterday due to some of my opinions, but they reinstated it. And then on Telegram, Mendocino Patriots. So, we attend all of the board of supervisor meetings and call in. They have been only giving us 10 minutes or write in. I've gone to the school board meetings, and we are the group that went around to all the restaurants. And before Dr. Corin, the public health officer's recommendation to put up the signs of vaccination status of employees and patrons, we went to all of the restaurants with an anti-discrimination sign and asked if they would hang it up. So it's great that I'm not the only one. I think when you and I first met in person, you were the one showing up for the Freedom Walk.
Right.
And we also do a protest in front of the courthouse on Fridays, and there's one in Willits, and we've done them at the hospital. Like, it was hospital staff asking us. We've done, trying to get the board of supervisors to open, and, lots of things, maybe some performance activism coming up.
Nice.
That kind of trying to show people. But speaking of the no listen rule, it feels like it's all on deaf ears. And I've even tried to go through like one of the board of supervisors or one of the members of press and like send him things and like, hey, read this. And do you really believe that? And here, because in another interview, he had mentioned that he had heard of the Great Reset. And I was like, it's a book and here it is. And, so trying to give some background, but even him, like the last time I sent him something, he was like, could you just, and I was like, okay, I really tried. So, and the board of supervisors, they don't really say anything. And the school board, they don't say anything, but I guess in full disclosure, COVID hasn't been on the schedule. So they say, oh, we can't say anything.
Right.
So, protesting at the school district for the walkout day. And, I will never wear a mask. So every day it's a bit, I was at the post office earlier and this lady was like, we don't have to wear masks. Like we don't. And I was like, okay, great. Here we go again, but it turns out she did not want to wear one. And she was questioning loudly, and they were saying, oh, we don't enforce it. And then she was like, we don't have to. And then outside I, introduced myself and, offered to give her a business card. And
so some people do listen. It turns out some people will actually listen.
Well, she already had her mind made up. I don't think I shifted that.
Right.
But, when I first heard her talk, I kind of rolled my eyes like, oh gosh, just how am I going to react to it today?
Yeah. Well, let's just talk the big picture for a second to kind of set up the rest of the conversation about this concept of just, what are your feelings about using psychology to analyze these big cultural occurrences, especially in terms of what's going on with COVID and and the emotional abuse essentially that I think, as George and I have discussed, have been heaped upon us as individuals that have different opinions than the dominant narrative. And how does it relate to, the myth making that occurs inside of the family system?
Well, I kind of saw that it was a similar situation to what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And, the peacemaker and, we always had books about the family around, So I don't know if I read one when I was younger, but the wounded child and the orphan child, and Jung's idea, but then just the family and the role we play. So when this first happened, it was like a total reenactment. Even my father, who was a germaphobe, so we got like one person saying, wash your hands, stay away from people, don't touch it, it's fallen on the floor, to somebody else giving, the dictator giving these rules, and another parent, my mom, like, oh well, let's just please everybody and do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I was the rebel then, like, prove it. Why are we doing it that way?
Right.
And it makes more sense. Can I carry all the garbage bags at once? Why do I have to go one at a time?
Right.
I can carry them all. Like, it's okay, So I've tried many times to think about why some people can see it and some can't.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ideas is it the role that they played in their family, and the friends who couldn't question. And I was always allowed to question. And I have a sibling who lied a lot. And so I was always somebody who would tell the truth. And so I like,
right.
Is that why I ended up in this role where right away I kind of knew something was, something was wrong.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because I've been thinking lately that I grew up in a family, I think, where gaslighting was happening. I didn't realize that for a long time. And I think my response was to want to be a really logical person and be a critical thinker, so I could try to make sense of these arguments that didn't make any sense, that were going on in my family. And now I feel like I'm triggered by the media, because to me, the mainstream media is clearly gaslighting. I mean, a guy like Dr. Fauci and the stuff that he says, I mean, Dr. Fauci is the gaslighter extraordinaire, like the way that he talks. And I was telling you yesterday, the RFK book, which I'm sure many of our listeners, maybe they're checking that out. It just came out. And he's really going down the list of these Fauci quotes. I saw something on Twitter just today, for example, where they were talking to Fauci about his critics, DeSantis and Rand Paul, that are criticizing him. And Fauci's response was literally, when they're criticizing me, they're really criticizing science, because I represent science. And it's like,
he's still saying that?
Yeah. I mean, he's like taking credit upon himself for being able to decide what science says.
Yeah.
And trying to take credit. And of course, he never actually says what science says, which is why it's so confusing for people like me who want to make sense of his words. Because when I look at his references and the remdesivir study,
the thing about science is it's never settled.
And it's never settled.
And my degree was like a lot of research, and it's never settled. You just know like what you don't know. That's all you ever know, is what you prove to be wrong. And I watched his documentary that was on, or I started to. I got pretty far, but the one on Disney, and
I couldn't watch it.
Well, I had like a couple minutes in, and then I was like, oh my God, don't. And then I was like, no, just try and watch more of it. And it always plays so phony to me. And, maybe, energy work, or the way I grew up, or the way I've kind of trained myself, I'm a really good bullshit detector.
Yeah.
And I've tried to question it. Like, why do I believe that those aren't contrails? And try and think the opposite way and see how that feels, know? So, the family systems, I was thinking, what you were just saying, how people freeze. And that's kind of like the stress response too, of fight, flight, fawn, freeze.
Mm-hmm.
So, the whole last year, people were put into that. And for a year and a half or more, so maybe it is the freeze why they can't actually see what's in front of them.
Yeah.
And, what it would mean if they actually absorbed that information, that they're, it's ego. An ego thing that maybe they don't feel strong enough to be able to handle. So, that's like another idea of why some people can see, have they already had their egos broken and built them back up? You know,
Yeah.
have they like done the work to feel how imperfect you are
Right.
and then be okay with that, you know? Which I, you know, looking through John Bradshaw's book, that's like a big part of it, is feeling that, you know, discomfort, and that it just would be too uncomfortable or too threatening
Yeah.
for people to actually, but it does seem like they can't, you know, is that part of the mind control, the mass formation, or
I remember a few years ago when people started saying that I had confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance.
mm,
And I, like you, I think that people who have trained themselves to be critical thinkers, you know, my first reaction was actually, maybe I do. You know,
yeah,
I'm gonna check this out. I'm gonna double check myself and make sure I'm not making these
right,
kinds of simple mistakes or whatever, these unconscious mistakes, and try to make that unconscious conscious. And and then I would continue to you know, debate, or I'm kind of thinking specifically of a time when I was on one of our local listservs where a lot of people have these political debates, and I was really interested in trying to express my point of view to, you know, my community, and see if I could change anybody's mind about any of the stuff that was happening. This was 5 years ago, and it's only been reinforced under COVID. And I finally kind of realized that, you know, I would give them the benefit of the doubt. I'd check their sources, and you know, I'd compare them to my sources, and I would just trying to stick to, you know, be very disciplined about only trusting the most primary
yeah,
sources that could be, you know, proven to be verifiable. And I just kept finding that, like, eventually I realized these people have confirmation bias and they have cognitive dissonance, because they're not even, and that's exactly like you're saying, they get triggered into that fight or flight mode, and that's when these rules come in. Like, once you bust through the mythology that they're getting taught, which is the same as the family system that you're ingrained in as a child, but on the macro level, it's like the mythology is Dr. Fauci knows what's true. He represents the science. When he speaks,
mm-hmm,
he's saying what the science is saying. And if you disagree with him, it's not, you know, you're anti-science, which none of this is true. The science doesn't say what Fauci says. But then when you try to show people, they don't listen to you. And there's the no listen rule. They can't hear what you have to say.
I was thinking about the no listen rule, which, you know, according to the book, it's that you're so self-absorbed in worry that you can't hear, you know, it's,
Hmm.
but the no listen rule also with like an abuse situation where, you know, you tell your mom, hey, Uncle Johnny has been, you know, doing whatever, and her response is so important in that first, you know, moment, where if she, you know, believes you and takes action, then you're likely going to be okay, you know?
Right.
And if, oh, you know, or whatever, well, he's your uncle. He wouldn't hurt you, you know, how detrimental that is. And that they stop talking.
Yeah.
They don't tell again. You know, it's like this
That's one of,
other, looking at traumatized, you know, people who've become things in society that, you know, maybe aren't the best things in society. They always tried once, you know, and then it's like their spirit is broken and they just, well, it doesn't matter who I tell because they're not going to listen.
yeah. In John Bradshaw's work, and George and I talked a lot about this too, is that shame-based dysfunctional system. And I think so much of this is to, you know, and actually this is something we can really think about. I mean, are people are, I mean, maybe the shame of having listened to a Dr. Fauci, if they
Mm,
discovered that Dr. Fauci was lying. I mean, this is just to go back to your example of the uncle maybe does something inappropriate, but your mom is like, shh, you know, it becomes part of the family mythology that we don't talk about these things. No
yeah.
talking, and I'm not going to hear when you try to talk about them because it makes me feel shame. It makes me uncomfortable. And so this shame-based dysfunction, and then when you're actually going through the healing process, I think a lot of times therapists tell you to it's important to feel the healthy shame. Like you've got to actually be able to kind of go back and realize, no, you've made mistakes. Everybody does. That's embarrassing. Let's move on,
Yeah, I think that's his thing, right? Is that we're all perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
And all of the other, like the rules of dysfunction are to avoid that feeling.
Right.
And, add and the family roles that they had and add in addiction or whatever, which was always interesting to me in my situation. Nobody had addiction to substance issues.
Right.
It was all this psychological mind power trips, where
I
I wanted that. I was like, could you just hit me? Because then I would have proof,
Yeah.
It was so mind fucky that I don't know if I can say that, but
Sure.
I
I've
wanted
actually
like that physical.
I've actually
Just
well, excuse me, but yeah, just to add to what you were saying, I've found that a lot of times I feel like a lot of therapy, even in the John Bradshaw book, he focuses on addiction so much because that's the identifiable patient.
yeah,
And I'm not justifying addictive behavior at all, but I am saying that that's just one symptom of a larger
yeah.
dysfunctional family
Maybe
system, which
that's like
includes
the easy
emotional
one.
abuse. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's the
And
obvious
maybe,
one.
when I worked with like foster children, most of them are drug and alcohol abuse.
Hmm.
I had like one girl that was more mental health in the house. And it's not that it doesn't exist, the mental and emotional abuse or neglect, but maybe that's just the clearest one. And that's what the foster care system is just littered with. And there was no addiction or violence, I should say, in my situation, where it was like, and trying to relate it to this and now, like, so are people waiting for the big, am I like waiting for them to hit me with, you can't work at all, or you can't, to have some kind of proof? But even then people don't really listen,
Yeah.
to the dangers. The danger is near, there's danger here. But just, the shutdown, if you aren't heard, then you shut down. So, there's so many layers to it. There's so many.
I find that, like, in my family, my grandfather was an alcoholic, but my dad, he was just an untreated child of an alcoholic. And
Mm,
the cycles are getting repeated. So in my birth family, it wasn't so obvious. But nonetheless, there
hmm.
was all of this unhealed trauma, which again is kind of why I think focusing on the addictive personality is
So
just
there's something that, because my grandpa was an
right.
alcoholic, so
Yeah.
maybe there's a link.
Yeah.
That, like, does everybody have that in common, where they're the child of the family that really lived that?
I mean, that I think is, there's generational trauma, and how few people in our culture have ever even, thought about healing from generational trauma. And if you don't, then you're just going to keep passing it down. Like somebody's got to take the responsibility. Um, and so, it, if you don't, then the cycle of violence is just going to continue. Well, let's try to extrapolate this out to then what's happening again in relationship to COVID, because I think there's a lot when people are overwhelmed with the fear porn and they're getting scared about COVID or terrorism or whatever it is on the news, then that triggers their own family trauma.
Mm.
Uh, and maybe it's helpful if you've done some healing work. Maybe that's one way. I think people who are emotionally healthy, I think there's two ways actually to kind of look through the propaganda. And one is if you're a real critical thinker, because then you're like, these guys are gaslighting us. They can't actually prove their point. And the other is if you're emotionally healthy, you're just going to make boundaries and go like, you can't do that to me,
Yeah.
um,
But then still there's the pleasers, even if you're emotionally sound,
sure.
or, the people, and that too, I think we have different roles. and not everybody is the warrior, and I had
Right.
several people kind of tell me not everybody is like you, because I'm like, why are you not doing anything? You can see it. You're still wearing a mask and they're not going to make you in here. Why are you still? And it was like, just to have understanding that not everybody is even built to confront, so maybe there's another layer of, were you heard in your family?
Yeah.
Did anybody say, I hear you? Or, like in my situation, I was trusted, like from a pretty young age, even though my brother was older, what I said was known to be the truth, so it wasn't an age thing. So I don't know what was that prompt that you had given for that.
Well,
And
I think we should just kind of bring it around too to the larger psychological
yeah,
patterns that we're all dealing with just in terms of COVID. And I thought maybe we could even relate, because everybody is coming out of these damaged, I think, family systems, or at least so many people at this point. I mean, we just are, as a culture, haven't prioritized psychological or emotional health for really thousands of years.
yeah.
So a lot of people have these tensions, and then when they get triggered, um they're not really able to be calm and think critically, and
Well,
then
yeah,
engage
when
in these
you're
conversations where they're listening, and then
and when you're in trauma and fear, like your brain doesn't actually work to be logical.
yeah.
So, I think that is a part of it. And then it's the brainwashed at this point, and the breaking free of that
Right.
would take so much energy.
And the
And
feeling of shame that people are trying to avoid, to go back to that, because they'd be
really
ashamed they got
lost.
fooled.
They got fooled, and all of the things that they had done to reinforce that,
Hmm.
and that it's a darker world if you see what
Well, that's
appears
true.
to be going on, and
Yeah.
that's even too much to handle. Like, you can't just wear gloves and a mask to protect yourself from the new world order. That's a lot scarier than an illness. So it's easier to just believe, this mythology. And people, I was kind of thinking about, what are these, because even when they're presented with the evidence, like about masks, that they don't actually work, or, ivermectin, that it's not horse paste.
Right.
And even it becomes mainstream, Joe Rogan, that was pretty mainstream. That, okay, it is a drug that's useful, but people still
Right.
can't comprehend that.
And I even thought Joe pulled his punches on that. I thought he was afraid because he kept just reciting the one in vitro study and not the other 60 studies in human beings that show that ivermectin works. And he was like, just pretending like there's this one little study that says it might work. It's like, that's not
Yeah,
true, Joe. I mean, I'm glad that he made a public stand saying maybe we should be open-minded about this, but he really should have, if he
right.
had been more objective about his stance, been like, there's a mountain of evidence that this was working, and what are we doing as a society by not allowing people to be treated from a disease that's making a lot of people suffer,
And that was
we should
pretty
be indignant
mainstream.
about it.
But then the town hall with Mike McGuire, the Northern California, they said the same thing. Like, that I'd give it to my dog if he had worms, but
Right.
I wouldn't give that to a human. And no, that is not an effective treatment. And
Right.
so it's still that mythology
Yeah.
of, this is the only way, or where, at the co-op, let me see your policy. Look right there. There are exemptions, and they just, or do you
Right.
want to see the laws? I have them printed out. No, I don't want to see anything,
Yeah. You're not
except or
wearing a
else.
mask. We're gonna kick you out. Yeah.
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 And then, I told you the story of that happening yesterday, that we were kicked out, kicked out. The cop was like, hey guys, like they've asked you to go, so now you
Right.
have to, but I'm not going to stop your civil disobedience. And people clapped, and it's been really disturbing. That was on Saturday, because I mean, they know me, and none of them were making eye contact with me. They were with
Yeah.
the other people who don't actually shop there or didn't used to. But it's been very disturbing since then. And I realized it's because of that dehumanizing element. And that so quickly I am somebody to mock or laugh at, which then, it's not just the danger of this is not just, oh, well, I'd have to sit at a different counter or at the back of the bus. It's the fact that then it's okay to abuse that person.
Right.
It's not just, oh, well, you've got a drinking fountain, why are you complaining? It's like, it's a whole dehumanization of those people, and then abuse and mistreatment is okay because
Well,
you aren't.
yeah, that's an interesting point that you just bring up in terms of even like what I've heard about how societies progress towards fascism or totalitarianism, and dehumanizing the other is, is
Yeah.
on that list towards the end of what happens. And isn't it amazing that in our cultural family system, we really are seeing that we're getting to that place where, it's okay for, that the younger brother who's the rebel or the scapegoat, now the family's like just turning on them. It's all their
Yeah.
fault. And
Real anger.
Yeah.
Because somebody said, and I didn't hear it, but we had other folks recording, I hope you guys die of COVID.
Yeah.
Or when we've stood in front of the courthouse, they yell like, I look forward to reading your obituaries.
Right.
So that is, and it's not physical violence, but what
No,
is
it's
that
emotional
line?
violence. Yeah, it's abuse. And they're certainly not listening. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
listening because all that you're doing
Fear
is
is, yeah.
disagreeing with, the majority even. I mean, let's just like, we haven't been able to debate this, and we haven't had any kind of democratic debate about any of this. It's all mandates from executive orders from this state of emergency. And isn't it
And
okay
they
for
all
some of us to
said that.
disagree
Like,
without?
I don't want to lose my job. I'm just following orders. And I'm like, can't you hear yourself? What
Right.
did you just say?
Right.
But all of those things, even that the PCR tests work, like that's been mainstream proven, like on the CDC website, that it doesn't,
Yeah.
show what they're trying to say that it shows. But that's just like, I don't want to hear it, Genevieve. They do work.
It
The
it really
masks.
it's like 1984 where, the party says one thing one day and then the next day they say the opposite, and everybody just is going like, "Okay, we're doing what you
Yeah.
say." It's absolutely outrageous.
And that's a part of making somebody crazy too, is to never, you and George talked about, the mass formation and free floating anxiety, and that this helps you to feel less anxious if you just go along with those,
Right.
whatever they're doing this day. And if you try and make sense of it, then it'll make you crazy.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then you
for
might
sure.
act crazy, and then people can easily label you as crazy. So
Exactly. The classic identifiable patient who's driven crazy by the emotional abuse, and then everybody, points the finger at them. Yeah.
and
Well,
I'm trying so hard not to be that, in the moment at the co-op when I want to say what I really think. But then
right.
it just, and I just like in amazement. But what were you going to say?
Well, I think maybe we should start to wrap it up, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes or so. And one of the things that I did want to touch on, we find ourselves in an interesting quandary just in terms of the no listen part of things, because like I've discovered that, and you're actually going out there and doing a lot of these local political actions. When you go to the school board meeting, I mean, I feel like, or when you go to the health board meeting or the supervisors meeting,
Yeah.
what interests me is that these people that are, on the school board, and the school boards were last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of press. I think one school board in San Diego or something, or LA County, tried to claim that these parents were terrorists and that they needed to
Oh
be
yeah,
removed.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting crazy because the parents don't, They don't want their kids to have to wear masks at school or get, mandated vaccines at school, and they're freaking out, but they can't afford to pull their kids from the school. So it's a big deal. But it's so interesting because I feel like when you go to these kinds of meetings, and I know what it feels like, and you're trying to give your point of view, and you know that nobody's listening to you. They're not going to do what you say, and they're just like twiddling their thumbs, and maybe they have to give you 3 minutes. And they're waiting for your 3 minutes to get done so that they can ignore what you're saying. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to me because these people that are in that place of authority, even the not maybe just the workers at the co-op, but certainly the managers at the co-op, or the people that have to make these policies. But let's take the school boards a little bit of a better example, because they have to do what the state tells them, or the local health authorities basically have to do what the state tells them. And if they actually disagreed, then they would probably get fired or kicked out. I mean, they have so much, it's just such an interesting situation to be in. So they're doubly screwed. Like, they're in the public, they have to promote, or even our representative McGuire, especially somebody like that. Like, if he came out publicly against mandates, they would just railroad him out. I mean, and
Maybe
so
they have to self-preservation, because even if it was like 50% believe this versus they can get the masses to just go against us if they stick with their rules and
yeah,
regs. I mean, the clapping wasn't just one person.
right,
And so it's mob mentality,
yeah.
where if they were to disagree, all of that heat that they've put on others, and all of the heat of everything. So they might as well pick that side. But there was this woman, and she's running for us. It's not the school, but she was twirling her glasses while
Yeah.
people were talking about their children dying. That's like one of the flagged posts
Right.
of mine on Facebook,
Right.
talking about that, and just such disinterest. And I said that in a public way, and people were like, maybe she was just nervous. Genevieve, I shake my leg when I get nervous. But it was just this air,
Yeah.
of get on with it. Where, yeah, just the lack of listening,
Yeah.
and how important that is for, I mean, I see it with kids. It's like when kids are like, look at me, look at me. And they turn and look to see if you are actually looking, it's being heard and being seen. And
I
yeah,
think
the go on.
well, I think what you're talking about also in terms of the mob mentality should be like, people really have their pulse on the mob, and it is an amazingly powerful force
Yeah.
that if you know what the mob is thinking, and you know that what they're thinking is completely wrong, what it takes to go up against that, it
Yeah.
takes some kind of emotional fortitude that a lot of people just don't have. And then when you add on top of that, like, you're a school board member, or you're a local county supervisor, or the local health authority,
Yeah.
you're just going along to get along. And if you go against the mob, I mean, then your whole career or your job is on the line. Or I mean, I don't even know. And what's amazing to me is that, I mean, I think we live in such a hierarchical society, is that a lot of this just literally can come from Fauci. Like, whatever Fauci says, then everybody down the hierarchy has to do what he says, or else they'll be liable. If you disagree, if you're a doctor and you disagree with Fauci, and you give someone ivermectin and they take 10 times the amount or 20 times the amount, and they get kind of sick from it, then you're liable. Whereas you can give somebody remdesivir, they could die in 3 or 4 days, and you're not liable because Fauci lets you do that. And I think it's
Yeah.
probably not exactly the same for a school board member, but if they do what the state tells them, they're safe. And then the mob is listening to all of this, and they're doing what the
Yeah.
state tells them, and it's a way of staying safe. And then once you break away from the mold, you really do expose yourself to these attacks, and so it causes people to just shut down, both in terms of
And you're
how
familiar
what
with
they
like
say and what they listen.
The Ash experiment, where it's going along with the mob
Yeah.
of is this line the same size as that line? And at first the person is like, no, it's the second line, and then eventually just kind of does it. Or there's some other little meme of people and a bell ringing and everybody stands up at
Right.
the
I've seen
dentist
that one
or
too.
whatever.
Yeah.
But one little trick to all of that is those studies only work if you don't know that you're all in a study. I mean, you know that you're in a study because you signed up, but if you know the abstract,
Right.
if you know the purpose of the study, you are not a good participant anymore. So if we debrief everybody,
Right.
then they're no longer a participant that is going to give you any real data,
We need to, everybody needs to read The Great Reset. This is the abstract for the experiment, people, and this is what you're all doing if you just would understand, that this is what it's all about.
Really, like I was saying, the anxiety and how to get people out of that trance is a bigger threat, which that is, the Great Reset is a bigger threat.
Yeah.
So, and I still try and like not kick people down because I want to be there for them when they're ready. And that's like the role as a leader to me. Like, okay, I'm going to word it this way in a positive way, even though I want to tell them what I really think,
Yeah.
But that greater threat is, I mean, it seems apparent, but it's only going to get more apparent. Or I don't know how much worse. And here we're in, California, we're way better off than, Australia, New Zealand, and now several European places that I just can't even. Germany, and then Greece, I saw is forcing vaccinations for 60 and older. I just saw that today. I haven't looked into it, but everybody here is just like, oh, well, we're allowed to have Christmas this year.
Right.
So, but yeah,
we'll see about that with the new variant.
Study, right. I mean, the timing. And then, Newsom is in Mexico. And it's like, even that, like, he has consistently broken his own rules, caught in a restaurant without a mask, his kid at summer camp without a mask after he had just told, that was, and then his 12-year-old not vaccinated. And then now it's another dangerous threat. And he goes to Mexico, like that too, like, is the thing. I'm like, Mom, like, can't you see that is not cool? Like, that's not cool, right? Rules for thee and not for me. But I don't know what it will take, but it's like even the no asymptomatic spread, like, that's been proven now. And yet that's the whole reason for the masks and the distance, right? Because you might not know that you're sick.
Yeah. And what's really killing me is all the new science about the transmissibility of vaccinated people. When they have a breakthrough infection, or even if they're asymptomatic, they're still transmitting the virus. So why even talk about mandates and passports? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And yet I still see people screaming that we need these things.
Well, it's part of that old mythology now that no, masks do something. And no, the vaccine is safe and effective and it saves lives.
Right.
So even though there's all this inconsistency, still, and that's, I'm back.
Yeah.
That is something that, blows me away, that you still can't, and you're going to show your papers.
Right. And it's fascinating, actually, that we can clearly look and know what the mythology is. The vaccines are safe and effective. Asymptomatic spread is a big deal.
Masks work. PCR test.
Yeah. Are the gold
checks
standard.
For viruses.
Yeah.
And there are no adverse reactions.
Right. And they're extremely rare. Extremely rare.
Extremely rare. And according to Public Health Officer Dr. Corin, you're fine after a couple weeks of ibuprofen.
Right. Yep.
Your heart and pericardium inflammation is fine.
Myocarditis, no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. So we can see the mythology just like the family mythology, that even though it's not really true, everybody just conforms to it, and then nobody is really allowed. There's just an underlying passive aggressive tendency or understanding that nobody talks about. Nobody talks about what goes against the family or the cultural mythology,
Well,
and that's
it's
it.
kind of
And
conditioning too, because, you know, you say the right thing and you get praise, and you
to-
say the wrong thing and you get sad looks.
totally,
You know, so just like the kid who learns to say the cuss word because everybody laughs every time, you
right?
know, so they're just like, oh, well, this is the way. So I don't know how some of us were saved from that,
Yeah,
you know, that part too. But I always, those studies, I was always like, well, I wouldn't do that, you know, or, you know, Milgram, any of those that like you commit suffering upon others if,
yeah,
you know, you get you're doing the right thing, and like, good job, keep going.
yeah. The authority figure tells you, so it must be the right thing to do, even
Yeah,
when it's
where do people
obviously
get
not.
that? I guess it's the father again, like a strong, charismatic father who you don't question or talk back to.
Right. And I think it's ingrained in people in public education too, where the teacher is
Mm,
the authority, and you go through this 12 years of your life, or, where if you don't do what the authority figure says, then, you get this grade, or if you disagree with the authority figure, and if the more you disagree, the
yeah,
lower the grade and the more shamed you are, you're a failure. You
right.
get an F.
I mean, you get kicked out of the class and all the kids laugh and you clap.
Yeah.
You know, it's the
Yeah.
same kind of thing.
So,
And
yeah,
that
it's
that
ingrained.
hierarchy, it's like you know, the judicial system too, where there's somebody at the head of class and you all
Right.
face them, you know. But some of these people went to Waldorf and they were
Sure.
homeschooled, and so you'd think that they could see that other
It would be interesting to
way, but
see the percentages, the percentages, say, of homeschoolers who are inclined to toe the line on the COVID thing and the lockdowns and the
yeah.
mandates, as compared to the percentages of, say, a public school, somebody that went to public school the entire time. That'd be an interesting thing to check out.
But then there's the different kinds of people too, the people
Sure.
who are the ones who would question it, and the ones who just are going to go along with it. You know, it's probably wrong, it's probably poison, you know, let's check, sure, it's magnetic or not. Like, yeah, I know it's messed up, but I just don't have that kind of energy to fight back.
Right.
But somewhere else in the kind of study for this conversation, they were talking about the percentages of people that buy into it, you know, and that was like 30%, and 40% of people go with the bigger crowd. And that in this situation, it's very, you know, bipartisan. It's like, okay, the blue people are totally buying in.
Hmm.
Um, the red people, well, I guess it doesn't really fit, but but
Well,
that they're the folks who actually see it, that other 30%, they are the most mixed group of people, that they have the biggest variety in age and religion and, you know, all
interesting.
of the
Yeah.
above.
Yeah, I
That
mean, one of the things that's been made clear throughout this process from me is the power of ideology to shape people's thinking. I mean, if they really identify with an ideology, my God, it feels like they're so easily manipulated. I mean, I just like people need to be able to step out of this box of identifying either as the left or the right, and just start using critical thinking on every
yeah.
different issue and how you feel about it. It doesn't have to conform to what, Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson says. You can think for yourself,
It's
because
so far beyond the possibility for people to even consider that those two are not great people
yeah,
too. You know, that my aunt will be like, but it's Rachel I hear it from, and I'm like, yeah, well, like, look into who her family is and who's funding it. And
yeah.
And then you kind of get flooded with information. It's like what I was saying before about it making you crazy when when it switches so quickly, what's true.
Yeah.
Another way is to have like flooded with information where you have both sides. And that too, it's like you could prove this or you could prove that. And so you can't hear any of it.
Yeah.
Because it's all potentially not true. Well, so when I talk to people about how to understand, or, when I was teaching, it would be like, well, try and think like me, like I've told my mom, just to imagine that what I'm saying is true and try and prove me right. Instead of trying to prove me wrong, try and prove me right. And then, one of them is going to make more sense to some deeper part of you. It's like why I try and read mainstream sometimes, just to know where they're coming from. And, like in a debate, you have to know both sides to be, good at your argument.
Right.
Like it has to be,
this is where
you have to listen to every.
That's just it. This is where the no listen rule comes in, because when you try to give people information that's outside of their paradigm, they don't want to hear it. If you start to say, look who's funding Rachel Maddow, or look who funds Fox News, and guess what? They're the same people,
Yeah.
Then they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that their person or their ideology can be corrupted, just like everything else, or certainly, Dr. Fauci or these. I mean, I've been amazed at the fact that people can't hear the clear evidence that this government corporate system is corrupted by billions of dollars worth of money. And I mean, how can you not see it? But they don't want to listen, do they? So anyway, it's been a while. We should wrap it up. This is longer than our usual program, but I wanted to introduce Genevieve to everyone. And so, we had a fruitful conversation, definitely, and I love the experience that she's had actually on the local political level and the local activist level, because not a lot of people are doing what you're doing, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate being able to hear the stories of what happens when you actually are willing to go out there and confront people with a lot of this guilt and shame and fear, and trigger them,
And I think from the beginning, because people kind of know me, it is a small town, and I didn't fit any of those. Like, I'm not, a selfish Trumper who, blah, blah, racist. So it did, like, initially, I think all those people have, like, blocked me now. And just don't even.
Right.
But they're like, but Genevieve, like, you're not selfish,
Right.
How can this
You're not a white supremacist.
And it really like kind of threw people for a loop. But now I just think numbers, we just have to have all these people actually show up. We had 16 or 17 show up to that maskless shopping. And we have another one in like a week and a half or so. So you could look on MendocinoPatriots.org and sign up. And, people have their strengths, and even if it's yours is sharing, or we got these great little brochures that have a QR code to links of information. And those two, let's see. Yeah. So on one hand, it's the two hands, the red or the blue pill, and it's all the mainstream media sites, and then a red pill and a QR code. So those are our new little flyers for Mendocino Patriots.
Nice.
And, anybody local, come on, we need your bodies.
Sounds good. And I just will let everybody know. I guess I'll lead all in the show notes and everything. I should tell people about MendocinoPatriots.org. Is that where you want me to kind of lead people to? So anyone who's here local
from
anyway.
There, you can sign up for a newsletter, which, we're just starting to have more things. There's a calendar, so you can see when we do the rallies or board meetings. That we actually, I should say that we have another town hall meeting December 5th. And maybe you can put the link in or sign up. And this will be the fourth one. Last time we had like 80 people who showed up. And, a town hall. It's a wrap session of what we're doing. And last time we had somebody from Sonoma County and North counties. So we're trying to link up with all of those organizations to make it stronger. So the next one, it's a Sunday at 2, and the address is, it's a new address this time. So let me just sneak away visually and tell you the address.
Okay.
So it's 306 North Main Street in Ukiah, December 5th at 2 p.m. And there's actually, if you are in Ukiah, and I think you have listeners all over the world, there is a sign right like the field by Coles. There's a sign for the town hall. And it's very similar, but the date has changed. And so if you want to speak at that too, then you can go ahead and sign up or let the email, let us know. And yeah, we're all about working together, and we are just such a different mix of people who have this common goal, the freedom.
It is one of the most fascinating things that people that, maybe traditionally identified as left or right are all kind of starting to wake up, and it makes interesting bedfellows, right? I mean, just all kinds of different people that are coming together that are breaking away from that ideological mold and starting to recognize that, like, this is what I keep telling people who are arguing, well, the best thing for the community is to do what Dr. Fauci says. And I just have to respond, like, a healthy community believes in individual autonomy. If you don't, then you have a codependent relationship with your authority. And that is not healthy. That never has led to a positive outcome ever in the history of the world. So you're in for a world of hurt if you want to continue with this unhealthy codependent relationship with your government, So hopefully more and more people will start to wake up to that and start showing up to these local actions to actually make a difference. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for coming on and helping me finish up this series, because I just think I love the concept of the psychology of lockdown. I want to get through the rest of these rules of dysfunction. And I'll let everyone know that the incompletion rule is coming up next time. I don't know how busy you are, but maybe we could do it again next week and do these last couple in the next couple of weeks, hopefully maybe before the holidays, try to wrap it up either by the end of December or into early January. So the psychology of lockdown period.
I really enjoyed listening to them before, so I was already a fan of it. And so I really am flattered and appreciate you asking me to help you finish.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again, Genevieve, and for everyone who's been listening. And we'll be back soon. Again, excited about being able to finish the series. So I hope you are too. And once it's done, there's going to be, I think, 23 complete episodes that are really going to give a full package for what to watch out for, not just in your relationship with the government, but also with your friends and your family and in your intimate relationships as well. Hopefully we're learning a lot. So thanks again for listening. And thanks again, Genevieve. And we'll see you all soon. You bet. Take care.